I'd like to call the meeting to order to pledge allegiance and have a moment of silence. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Evan, do you want to do a roll call, please?
Hummus,
Yes,
Bailey,
I'm here.
Dolan,
Present.
Sutton.
Yes.
Quorum.
Approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Support.
We have a motion by Dolan, supported by Homa. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Call to the public on non-agenda items. Okay. Any business? We have an interview with village manager candidate. And Jamie, you can go up to the podium there. And you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am Jane Marie Eubanks. I have worked for the city of Ferndale for almost 25 years when I retired 4 years ago. Before that, I worked for University of Detroit. I ended up as the assistant controller there at the city of Ferndale. I started out as the finance director, worked in HR and ended up as the assistant city manager, and then because we had staffing reductions, I ended up as the treasurer as well. So by the time I retired, I was filling 3 roles. I retired thinking that I was going to be out of this business for a while. I ended up doing some consulting work. I purchased and operate a very small farm. So that's pretty much what I've done for the last 4 years. I saw this job and was interested in it because I'm a little bit familiar with the Oxford area. My parents were in this area for a number of years, and you know, life changes come by, and I decided to get back into the workforce. So that's why I'm here.
Okay. Can you tell me what specific skills that you're going to bring to this position?
Well, definitely my heaviest background is budgeting and finance, all areas from tax administration to annual budgeting to capital planning to project implementation, grants writing and monitoring. Very heavy background in HR. I've done labor negotiations with 7 different organized units and a number of units that were not under a specific union, but they were recognized units. Everything from dispute resolution up to arbitration, hirings, terminations. I filled in for the clerk's office at Ferndale when we had vacancies, so I've done pension administration. So pretty much everything there is in the city. I've overseen some areas of code enforcement, again, because of staffing rearrangements and vacancies. So I have a number of municipal skills.
What about anything to do with the building department?
Less of that. Code enforcement for Ferndale, it was under community development. So I more oversaw it from the finance area, reconciled building permits. So I had a small hand in it, but I did some.
Dave?
Yes.
Have you lived in a village or otherwise had experience with a village?
No, I've lived mostly in larger communities, although my farm is in Columbus, which until I bought in Columbus, I did not know that there was a Columbus, Michigan, and it's very small.
What population, approximately?
I don't even know. Well, sort of the joke was, I'm not sure God knew where we were when we bought there, because my neighbors are cows. It's very, very small.
What's the population of Ferndale?
Just around 20,000. It hovered underneath when I was there, and now it's built back because, of course, they're building much more condensed housing like condos and that, so it's gone up a little bit past 20,000 now.
What was it like being an assistant controller?
At University of Detroit,
Yeah.
it was exciting. Working for a university, there's a lot of positives. There's always things going on. Certainly having the students to take care of, because you always ended up having, special problems that came up that you were able to address and help them with. So it was a very fun time. I started there in loan collections and ended up with a couple of positions being assistant controller, so it was very dynamic environment. I was able to get my graduate degree from there, which was, a huge positive.
The bursar's assistant was mostly just clerical work?
It's receiving. That was loan collections. It's receiving. So you start from the ground up. That's as most basic as you can get in an operation, is taking in the cash.
Thank you.
Just to make sure I have it right, you pronounce your last name Eubanks?
Eubanks.
Or is it silent? Eubanks?
Yes.
In looking through your resume, obviously there are a lot of things in the strengths category that are very appealing to our situation. It's almost as if you rewrote it based upon our circumstances. Not to suggest you did, but if you did, very nicely done. Obviously, you've probably had some conversations with individuals about our community. What do you know about the Village of Oxford?
Like I said,
Organizationally.
Organizationally, very little, other than what I've been told as far as staffing levels. Of course, with this size of community, your back office tends to be very small. And from discussions with Susan before and today, it is small as what I thought, which, even though University of Detroit seems huge, City of Ferndale seems huge, there's a lot that you end up doing in a small organization outside of the realm of your job. So that I would expect the same thing here. It would not be unusual. I believe I kind of made a joke with Susan about one day having to shovel the walks of the library because everybody was taken up. It was a snow emergency and it was a dangerous situation. Obviously outside the realm of my normal job, and in fact it was on a Saturday and I happened to be going to the library and the work needed to be done. So, it is not unusual for me to step outside of the bounds, either up or down, depending on the need. Yes.
Does Ferndale have a downtown development authority?
We do.
That answers that question.
In reviewing your resume, it seems that you have expertise in streamlining organizations. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to get much insight about the village here. However, in a budgetary sense, we've pretty much cut and streamlined probably as much as possible. With that being said, we're looking for a steady hand to run the organization and solidify its operation. What could you bring to that challenge?
Well, as I was promoted at Ferndale, my old jobs followed me, so I never dropped the finance director when I became assistant city manager. I never dropped either one of those when I became treasurer. So I would say if I have one overriding skill, it's certainly personally streamlining, because you can't take 3 jobs and do them all over a long period of time and stay focused and frankly stay sane. You know, I had to be an expert at streamlining because there was a lot of things that needed to be done, and the buck stopped here.
Sure.
So I would say I have a lot of experience in that. We've had at least 2 periods in Ferndale where we had to do massive reductions, and no one likes those. And you know, all that a municipality, a village, a township has to offer is people. You know, we are a service organization. So when you have to reduce cost, you're talking people, because there aren't enough pencils and pens, you know, to reduce. So it was a huge task to figure out what was our minimal level of service that we could still operate. And at the time, a Headley override was not a viable option for us, or it wasn't an option that we were exploring. So, you know, our heavy service areas, police, fire, DPW, were affected the most. And, you know, those are uncomfortable for anyone to talk about. And that's not what, citizens don't want to see that, because that's a direct benefit to them. And so it was, you know, discussed for a long time. There were many meetings, public meetings held to discuss what our options were. But June 30th was looming, and we had, you know, I know of one time where we did have staffing reductions. We achieved them through an organized reduction of staff through early buyouts, you know, so we didn't happen to have layoffs. But it was a struggle for a number of years. And, you know, then we did go back and, you know, figured out what we could do, change some benefits, change some operations, and we did go back for a Headley override. But, you know, there was a lot of right sizing that was done before we got to that point.
Thank you.
I had all of my questions answered a couple weeks ago, so I don't really have anything to offer other than I don't have anything to offer. I don't want to say anything.
A great concern to me in this position is the solidification of the budget. We're in a position in which for many years the budget was overly complex and needed some simplification. While there obviously is an understanding of the budgetary process by your council and the employees to some degree, we're definitely in a period of time in which we need to transition to a simpler process. Would you foresee any difficulties in undertaking a project such as that?
No, actually, it is not at all unusual that either council members or staff members don't understand it, and you know, it's really out of their scope. Normal budgeting is out of their scope, and so part of what I did with different council members that I had was sat down with them individually and go through the budget. You know, the problem now, because we've got online budgets, if you use BS&A, the reports that they get are fine if you're a finance person, but they're not real useful for a department head a lot of times, or definitely not for council. And so I like to prepare a narrative with the budget that kind of walks you through the departments, the staffing of the departments, typical revenues from the departments, the expenditures. I like to organize the expenditures in personnel costs, you know, the daily costs, the pens and pencils, you know, the supplies costs, and then the capital cost or the capital needs, so that, you know, everyone can look through and see on a page, oh, you know, here's the dollar amount for your personnel, but that's supporting 10 people or 5 people, or, you know, whatever it is. So it just clarifies it for everybody. It isn't necessarily what you can see on a general ledger.
Sure. Thank you.
You had said you were familiar with multi-year budgets?
Yes, yes, I've done them up to 10 years. Pretty much anymore, everybody does at least 2 to 3 years, but I have done them 10 years. And like I said, the longer you go, the more soft the numbers get. But I think it's important as long as you indicate on those projections, what are you projecting? You can't project healthcare costs at rate of inflation, but you can project tax revenue, fairly well, unless you have some unusual construction going on that's, something above and beyond what you normally have. But, as long as those are outlined and notated, then you have a little bit more confidence the longer that projection goes out.
Jamie, can you tell me about your supervisory experience and how you manage staff to ensure that projects and priorities, policies and procedures are being taken care of?
Well, I like people to own their job. I like people to feel good about their job. I think if people feel good about their job, they do a better job. I feel that I've done a fairly good job rearranging staff sometimes to put people in places where their strengths are. But once they're placed in those jobs, I like to let them do their jobs. I certainly oversee, and throw in suggestions if some guidance needs to be given. But for the most part, I like to let people go. I like to give them the tools, the knowledge or the classes or the training that they need. And, I've certainly provided all those things, to various staff members through the years, but then I like to let them do their job.
Okay. What computer skills do you possess? Like Outlook, Word? You mentioned BSNA. Have you?
Yes, of course, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, but BSNA, yes, I have a lot of experience in the tax and assessing side and with the general ledger side.
Ms. Eubanks, are you familiar? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
Are you familiar with the M24 project that's forthcoming?
Yes, I did hear it was in 19, of course, because there's not a whole lot of places to divert, at least my familiarity with your downtown. It will be huge, and you have a lot of small businesses that depend on some street traffic. I know you have parking behind, but some of that, when you're diverting traffic, it's going to be a little bit chaotic. I would perceive it as a huge need, if you have a DDA, to get them involved, to walk the streets and tell people that this is coming and let them know. If you don't have a DDA, communication should be coming from the city, giving a rollout of what the construction schedule is going to be, how long it's going to take, a contact number if there's things that are insurmountable. The thing about construction people, they never park where you want them to park. So, that will have to be staged, that it isn't total chaos for the business owners. As well as, this is quite a main drag along here. And, those people that normally commute through town, they need a place to come and vent as well.
Do you feel comfortable in taking like a co-lead with the DDA on managing this project?
I'm sorry, we're taking a...
Do you feel comfortable taking a co-lead with the DDA and managing this project?
Absolutely. I mean, I have seen where DDAs and the funding city don't get along well, and that doesn't work. They have to work alongside together and work cooperatively on projects and issues, or else it doesn't work out well.
To give me an idea of the level of development in Ferndale, how big is Ferndale, like in miles or in square miles?
Small. It's 3.9 miles.
3.9 miles?
But we're very dense.
Square or
Pretty square.
end to end? I mean, that's square feet?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. So it's about twice as big as Oxford in terms of area.
Because I thought you guys were mine.
We're a little more than one.
1.24.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So the answer is that with the population that you just gave us, it's more densely developed than
Yes,
Oxford at this
yes.
point. Yeah, but not by a huge amount.
No.
Yeah. Thank you.
Continuing on the topic of economic development, do you have any particular philosophies or comfort levels with economic development and retention? Because obviously with the forthcoming project, it's going to be a significant concern. I would imagine that there will be significant involvement on whoever's going to be appointed to this position. What would your philosophies in regards to economic development and retention be? And do you have any experience with it?
Well, I think that economic development is driven by the council or the board. What is their, they directly respond to the community. So what is their ability to, do you want a 10-foot or a 10-story tall apartment building downtown? I think the manager's role is to reflect what the council wants. I think the community wants 10-story condos. I don't know that I have a personal philosophy about it. I think the community is a small, quaint community. So my guess is that that's the feeling of council, to maintain a small, quaint look. That probably isn't too much the way things are heading. Any of the walkable downtowns, now you're seeing what they call the old taxpayers, where you have, retail below and living areas above. That can keep your downtown very viable. But if it's not the wish of this community to go that way, I don't have a personal feeling about it. I think I would just reflect what, the position between the council and the community.
I guess let me be more concise. Do you have any experience generating economic development for a community? For example, occupancy. Do you have any contacts, any experience or strategies for bringing occupancy to a downtown community?
No. That was really a function of Ferndale's change. People were coming to
Right.
us. And that really started off very grassroots. A couple of storefronts going in. I say, what saved them is the resale community, the used goods
Right.
community started there. A couple art galleries started in town. From there, you bring people down, any niche type businesses, you open them, people have to have a place to eat. So a couple restaurants started. So it started very, small, but over 20 years,
Sure.
built up to what it is today.
Looking at your work history, I see that you do list Marcus Fire Public Safety Consultants. Can you tell me a little bit about that? A Google search revealed nothing. And just kind of to piggyback on that, I was kind of directed to your LinkedIn page in which you cite Treasury Consultant for Royal Oak. However, that's not on the resume. Can you kind of rectify those two and explain the responsibilities of each?
Marcus Consulting is my husband's business. He did consulting, public safety consulting, after he retired from the city of Inkster as the fire chief. And seeing as I had most of the HR background, he had specific fire experience and specifically fire chief experience there. I had a much more broad background in HR and HR consulting. So mostly what we worked for was the city of Lincoln Park. So like I said, for the 4 years that I was retired, I did a diverse array of work, some paid, some unpaid. And that was the one that really I made, the most notable from my 4 years. I mean, no one makes money off of a farm. So-
Sure.
And certainly
Right.
not at my level. And then the other one, maybe just really within a matter of days after I put in the application here, I got a call from the city manager at Royal Oak, who I worked with. He had been a finance director in Royal Oak before ending up as city manager. He knew I was retired, and they had an emergency in the treasurer's office. Their treasurer went on leave. Their water billing clerk also went on leave. So it was, he basically called me one day and said, would you consider this? And by the way, can you be here at 8 o'clock in the morning? And so I went there, and now I know not that city managers are not particularly credible, because he told me I would be there 2 to 3 weeks, and it's been 2 months and there's no end in sight. But that's what I've been doing. Because the water billing person is back out on leave and the treasurer is still on leave, so. But that, you know, I've done treasury before, and they knew my experience, so.
Do you have experience in, like, goal setting, visioning?
Yes. I think anytime you have employees, and you're the manager, you kind of have to set goals. I tend to be very internally goal-driven. That I have, you know, all sorts of daily, weekly, monthly goals that I work on. So, and I find that most people don't. Most people need direction. So certainly for staff, I've done a lot of goal setting. For councils, I have, because we tend to be budget driven. How much money we're going to bring in is how much service delivery we're going to give to the public. So I've done goal setting as far as, okay, if we had this much money, you know, this is what we're going to do. Or if we raise fees this much, this is what we'll be able to do. So I've done it both for staff and to, you know, council, it isn't always setting the goal for them as much as giving them options for what we could do, you know, given the revenue stream that we're going to bring in, what is possible.
And are you comfortable with the salary range that we
Yes.
had?
Yeah, actually,
Posted.
Mr. Davis did call me, and we went over it.
Okay. And if you were offered the job, how soon would you be available?
Well, certainly the sticky wicket that I didn't anticipate when I applied was Royal Oak. It really is much worse than I anticipated. They've had 100% turnover in the department in the last year, and so it's quite chaotic. So while I would normally say, you know, 2 weeks is courtesy, you know, I would find it hard to be out of there in less than 3 weeks or a month.
Evan, do you have any questions that you think we missed?
Just maybe one. When you are faced with a task, how do you attack it?
You know, I would say more from the side of my end result is I can't let problems go until I fix them. It's just the thing with me is I can't let an issue go. I'll keep thinking about it and figuring it out. So I think probably the first thing I do is analysis. You know, what is the problem? Why is this a problem? How can this be fixed? What are my options? and then I just don't let go until it gets resolved or implemented.
Are you good at writing and setting policies and procedures?
I
In your
actually,
opinion?
I wrote the entire employee manual for the city of Ferndale. I wrote all of the job descriptions that have been written in the last 20 years. Yes, I mean, that's probably a reflection of besides my primary education, going to a Jesuit college for graduate school. Not only did you have to take an accounting class or a business class, but you had to write a 25-page paper on every class you took. So, I can say whatever needs to be said in 25 pages or less.
Dave?
How would you describe your track record on grants?
Well, all of the grants had to come through me at Ferndale, and part of that was because I had so much experience with grants. A lot of times it'll be little quirky things that will get you pushed out of the grant process. And so I started making everyone funnel them through me because it was just easier, and I could, clean up some of the things that I knew were problems depending on who you were asking for money. And I've written grants. Actually, I wrote the grant for Inkster for them to get a big fire truck when my husband was there. So I just, I have a lot of experience writing grants.
In regards to your references, I happen to be quite familiar with the work of one of your references, and I guess I would inquire if you share similar philosophies. I'm not, in regards to Mr. Schiffman and his firm, I'm not necessarily sure if his occupational philosophies would coincide with the current employee organizational relationships. So I would just be curious if you share many of his philosophies or the work of his firm?
We worked very closely together for a lot of years. Of course, being I was it as far as the labor negotiator. So did I learn a lot from him? Absolutely. And just like I learned a lot from Brian Smith, who was a wonderful labor attorney, Howard had a lot of wonderful qualities. I like to be a little bit more responsive. If someone asks a question or concern, to me, the whole point of negotiations is you're not going to make everybody happy, but you should go away from the table with respect for either side. And that was not necessarily the case all the time, and that made me very uncomfortable because we still had to work together. And at the end of the day, the labor attorney still gets paid and walks away. I had to be there, so at the end of the day, I still have to work with these seven labor units. So to me, there should be more, the philosophy of getting to yes by negotiation. You give up some, I give up some, you get some, I get some, I didn't feel like that was necessarily there. But as far as, coming from a finance background, budgeting background, I knew how much money we had, and we didn't have enough to make everybody happy.
Sure.
And, the current marketplace for healthcare, which is killing us all. On the other hand, from a humanistic standpoint, if you promise somebody retiree healthcare and they're standing at the cusp of jumping off that retiree cliff and then you pull back, I find that very unpalatable. I think planning can remove a lot of those surprises. If you plan appropriately, if you staff appropriately. I was telling people we needed to fund retiree health care back in 1991. which is about 10 years before Ferndale actually started doing it, because that was the direction we needed to go, and proper planning would have right-sized this earlier or benefit changed us earlier to be able to afford what we made promises for. And like I say, I don't think any attorney cares about that, because at the end of the day, they still get paid.
Do you share that philosophy?
No, I think that if you make promises, you should keep them. And the only way I think you can do that is to plan appropriately. 10-year budgets, you know, even if they get soft after 10 years, so you know what you have to look forward to. When the tax market dumped, 2008, when everything dumped, you know, we knew we had to make changes to the budget. Well, the time to do it is 2008 or 9, not, you know, 2015. And the only way to do that, again, we're all body count. We're all service, and service equals manpower. So, you know, the time to discuss that with unions was back in 2008. Oh my gosh, look, there's a huge problem looming. What can we do together to you know, weather this storm? And
You happen to walk into my last question in regards to pension funding, and it happens to be one of the things that's of greatest concern to me in this position, is the funding of the employees' pension. Obviously a looming crisis. There's a lot of lip service that goes to the topic, but there's very little action. Very few individuals are really aware of what is transpiring with the pension fund. Do you have any experience and wisdom and knowledge that you would be able to bring to this community to evaluate the pension crisis and make the necessary changes to ensure the greatest likelihood of success for that pension fund, so that we're able to keep our obligations to these employees?
well, the first thing to do would be to have a discussion with your actuary, because the numbers from the actuary, depending on the actuary, can be very different.
Sure.
So you got to have an intelligent
About
discussion.
3% different.
Oh, only 3? So to have an intelligent discussion with them, to analyze the labor contracts, what has been committed, you know, to do thoughtful negotiation. You know, I find it a lot more palatable, but this does not go across all labor units. I find it more palatable to make changes to the person who isn't here yet. You know, if you have 2-tiering or you have a different benefit altogether, like Ferndale went from DB to DC for new people. People who were there could elect to go, but they weren't forced either way. But everybody coming in the door went DC. Well, you know, there were negative rollouts for that, and if somebody told you different, they would be lying. There were a lot of negative rollouts to that. But it had to be done, and it was probably the single biggest factor to Ferndale's stability, was to make those changes when we made them.
If that were to be your strategy, are you familiar with the options in place to continue funding a closed pension system? Would you be able to bring knowledge and experience to that pension fund?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question as far as communicating with the public. How do you, have you got experience in like newsletters, or how would you communicate to the public?
Well, in my role, I didn't do a lot of direct communication with the press, other than certainly every time we settled the labor contract, you know, I would be called for an opinion, or, you know, a discussion of what happened. Certainly budget-wise, you know, I was involved. You know, I think the more information out, the better. If you have a website that people visit, you know, that's a good place to put things. If it's not a particularly well-used, you know, site that people go to, then public meetings, just letting them know, you know, what's going on, what's coming up. You know, if you have a newsletter, a calendar that goes out, that's also a way to communicate with people. But you know, I always say the first thing is keep your door open, you know, let people know you're here and they can call and ask questions.
Are you a TV person?
I have spent many hours in front of the TV.
Do you have any questions of us?
I think I covered what the couple I had with you at the last meeting, so.
Mo, did you have anything?
I'm all good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do I leave?
They'd like to shake your hand.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it.
Thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks.
Watch for the buzzings.
Usually we have the candidates leave while we have our conversation.
I can do that.
Okay.
Do you want me to wait?
Yeah, probably CJ wants to take your pictures and ask some questions too. I'm sure. CJ is our reporter.
Much more than just that.
Sorry. Okay. Council's pleasure.
Just raise your right hand, raise your left hand, blink twice. I liked her. I wouldn't have brought her if I didn't think she was a good candidate, and I'll leave it like that.
I have no specific thing to say. I listened to everything that everyone has said, the council members as well as the candidate, and you as well, all 6 of us.
I found the candidate to be well experienced and insightful, relatively knowledgeable about our community, and I'd like a period of time to digest the information that I've just taken in and then reconvene at a future point.
If that's a motion, I'll second it.
I can turn that into a motion. I'll make a motion to set aside any further action on the candidate Jane Marie Eubanks while council evaluates the weight of the interview.
I'll second, but I'd point out that our council president has yet to weigh in, so you might want to do that under discussion.
I'd also like to put an end date on that, set a meeting or something, or to make a decision.
And then put the matter back on the agenda for next Tuesday. It doesn't appear that time is a factor on her end.
So, if you will do me the honor of maybe I can reread the motion.
Sure, certainly.
Changes.
Yes.
If I'm missing.
Yeah.
Motion to set aside the action on Jane Marie Eubanks to evaluate the candidate and put back on the next agenda, which would be
October 10th.
On October 10th.
Correct. That's perfect.
Does the second agree to that?
Oh, yes.
As far as discussion goes, I would not have, like, Mo brought her forward if I didn't think that she had a lot of qualities that we need. But I would like to think about it. So thank you for making that motion.
It's
Okay.
a significant decision, and it should receive significant vote.
Shall we bring her back in now for the vote?
We have a motion by Dolan, supported by Bailey. Let's have a roll call.
Helmuth,
Yes.
Bailey,
Yes.
Dolan,
Yes.
Sucker.
Yes.
And we're not telling you what we did, CJ.
That's okay, what's going on, it's fine.
I noticed you looked.
They're not.
You're gonna have to listen to it.
Public comment? Council comments? No?
No.
Dave?
No.
Eric?
Yes. Two, actually. First of all, I would like to express my greatest remorse and condolences to the victims in Las Vegas, my appreciation for all the first responders and the citizens for the manner in which they handled themselves in light of one of the greatest tragedies in our country. Secondly, I'd like to just briefly comment on the responsiveness of the village in general. I feel in recent months, and for obvious reasons, there's obviously much going on, but I feel like the village really needs to step up in terms of being more responsive to the community. There have been several issues which have seemingly slipped through the cracks. I don't think we're doing well communicating with the community about some of the issues that they've had. Specifically, one of the issues I'm talking about is trash. We had a topic that I personally, and I know several others, have been receiving complaints for 3 to 4 months over. I think we were slow to respond, slow to get information out to the community. If it was not for the editor of the Oxford Leader, we wouldn't have been able to get out some of the information that we ultimately did. I think it would behoove us as an organization to look into methods of communicating better with the community in a more expedient manner in this day and age of information. 2 and 3 weeks on down the road, responding to citizens is not adequate. We're in an instant information age. Many people object to social media. However, the fact of the matter is that is how the world is communicating, and that is how most of the world is getting most of its information. While things now appear to be resolving themselves, I feel like the issue of trash had gone on unresolved and unanswered by this community for so long. We created some of our own discontent. And I personally would like to see greater responsiveness, and I would like to see a substantial plan to improve that communication.
I have nothing.
I'll make a motion to adjourn it.
Second.
At whatever time Eric wants.
Okay, we have a motion by Helmut, supported by Dolan. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.